You ever get that feeling when you know something's wrong the second it happens, but you can't quite prove it yet? That's exactly what I felt the moment I opened my mailbox and saw that envelope. Clean. Crisp. With the kind of gold embossed logo that screams, "We think we're important." It read, Oak Ridge Community Enforcement Division. Sounded official. Too official. The letter inside was worse. Dear homeowner. It began, already a red flag. I wasn't part of any HOA. That's why I bought this house. It was quiet. Off-grid. Out of jurisdiction. A patch of land where I could be left the hell alone. And yet, here it was, a demand to register my property under the HOA. Submit a landscaping plan. And begin paying monthly community dues. Attached to it? A $250 fine for failure to maintain property aesthetics. Whatever that meant. Now, to a regular guy, this might have been annoying. To me, it was war drums. See, I'm not a regular guy. I'm a US Marshal, 20 years in. Hundreds of arrests. And a nose for fake authority. And this was the stink of a con job. But back then, I didn't know the name Karen Delaney. Not yet. The second notice came 2 days later. Another fine, $100 for unauthorized exterior modifications. I hadn't changed a thing. Third letter? $150 for noise disturbances. I worked nights. My house was silent. Fourth, $200 for a missing landscaping permit. Didn't even know that was a thing. 4 letters in 1 week. All threats. All fake. I ignored every single one. But Karen wasn't the kind of person you could ignore. No. See, Karen didn't just like rules. She breathed them. She had built a kingdom out of bylaws and nonsense. And anyone who didn't fall in line, she steamrolled. I met her in person for the first time on a Tuesday morning. I was walking out with a cup of coffee. And there she was, standing in my driveway. Mid-50s. Blonde bob haircut. Salmon-colored blazer like she was headed to a city council meeting that never existed. Good morning, she said. Like she'd been waiting for me. She had a clipboard in hand and the smirk of someone who truly believed they were in charge. I didn't say anything at first. Just leaned against my truck and let her speak. I wanted to personally remind you about your outstanding violations, she said. Flipping through her clipboard like it was the Book of Judgment. You've ignored 5 notices. That's very concerning to the HOA. I'm not in the HOA. I replied, sipping my coffee. Well, she chirped. Voice dipped in fake sugar. Oak Ridge Estates has expectations for the surrounding properties as well. It's only fair that everyone contributes. You wouldn't want to be singled out. There it was. The threat. I stepped forward just enough to make her shift her heels back. Let me make this real clear. Karen. You and your HOA don't mean a damn thing to me. You keep stuffing fake fines in my mailbox. Next one gets forwarded to my attorney with a harassment report. Her smile cracked. Just for a second. But she pulled herself together fast. I do hope you reconsider, she said. Things can get difficult. She turned and walked back down the driveway like she hadn't just tried to intimidate a federal agent. Now, here's the thing. Most folks might have brushed this off. Moved on. But I've seen what happens when you let petty tyrants like Karen get a foothold. They don't stop at fines. They escalate. And sure enough, the next morning, I found a pile of trash dumped on my lawn. Week after that, my mailbox was smashed in. Then came the whispers. People avoiding eye contact. Conversations dying when I walked by. Rumors. Then, at a gas station, old man Harris, been here since the 80s, leans over and says, heard you've got legal trouble. Karen says you've got a warrant out for you. I laughed. Thought he was joking. He wasn't. The next day, I got the letter. Big red letters across the top. Final notice, warrant issued. I opened it. Read the nonsense. And I laughed again, but this time, there was no humor. Because now, I wasn't just dealing with HOA overreach. Now, It was impersonating law enforcement. And Karen Delaney had no idea who she'd just tried to scare. Not yet. You ever watch someone dig their own grave, and they don't even know they're holding the shovel? That was Karen Delaney. After I ignored her fake citations, denied her HOA fantasy, and made it clear I wouldn't be bullied, she changed tactics. The harassment had failed. The threats hadn't worked. So she decided to up the ante. Tuesday morning, 7:12 a.m. I was halfway through my first cup of black coffee when I noticed two men in matching khaki shirts and navy slacks standing at the edge of my driveway, clipboards in hand, belts with what looked like badge holders and radios clipped on the side. One of them even had aviator sunglasses. It was like they were auditioning for an off-brand episode of Cops. I stepped outside, mug in hand, and stared. They stared back. "You the homeowner?" the taller one asked. His voice too practiced, too tight. "Who's asking?" I replied, letting my eyes drift to their name tags, if you could call them that. Laminated paper inside clear holders. Generic fonts. No agency logos. "We're with the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association Enforcement Division," the short one said like he was proud of it. "We're here to discuss your outstanding violations." I took a long sip of my coffee and set the mug down on the hood of my truck. "Oh yeah?" I said casually. "You fellas got ID?" Tall guy pulled out a laminated card that said Field Agent, HOA Enforcement Unit. I squinted. "That looks like it was printed at a Staples." They ignored that. Then short guy flipped his clipboard and cleared his throat. "Per HOA Regulation Code 14A subsection 3. You've failed to comply with multiple mandates. An arrest warrant has been issued." I blinked. "A what?" "You are under arrest," the tall one added, trying his best tough guy stance. I laughed. No really, I actually laughed. "Hold up," I said, raising a hand. "You're telling me the HOA issued an arrest warrant? You two think you're cops?" "We have full authorization under the Oak Ridge Charter," the short one said. "We're authorized to perform community enforcement actions." I tilted my head and took one slow step toward them. "You two ever actually met a real federal agent?" Their expressions cracked, just a flicker of hesitation, but they doubled down. "We don't need federal jurisdiction. The HOA has local authority over code violations and can initiate action to protect the community," tall guy said, reading it like a memorized script. I muttered. Then I reached into my back pocket and slowly pulled out my badge. Not a laminate, not a toy. The real deal, US Marshal. Silver and gold. Heavy enough to knock someone out if I had to. I held it up between two fingers. "Let them get a good long look." "Now," I said, voice flat, tone changing, "you just attempted to detain a federal officer on his private property under a fraudulent warrant. That's a federal crime. 2. Actually, impersonating law enforcement and attempted unlawful detention." Tall guy's clipboard trembled slightly. Short guy took a visible step back. "I'm gonna give you one chance," I said. "Tell me who sent you, or I start making calls and you two end up in real cuffs." Silence. Then tall guy's clipboard hit the ground with a loud slap. Short guy turned and ran, full sprint down the street, badge flapping behind him. I didn't chase them. Didn't have to, because I already had what I needed. I scooped up the clipboard and flipped through the pages. Fines. Photos of my house. A fake citation for non-compliant shrubbery. And at the bottom, printed in bold, "Warrant for enforcement action, signed, Karen Delaney, HOA President." I stared at that line for a moment. Then I smiled. It was over. She had officially crossed from delusional into criminal. And the best part? She had no idea who she'd just tried to play. That night, I ran a background check on the two agents. Nothing came up. Not licensed security. Not affiliated with any law enforcement body. Just two nobodies hired off the street with matching shirts and a script to follow. But the more I dug, the more I found. Turns out, I wasn't the first. Karen had done this before. To retirees. To single moms. to quiet homeowners who just wanted to be left alone. Fake fines. Fake hearings. Even threats of foreclosure. This wasn't some petty HOA vendetta. This was an organized scam. And Karen Delaney? She'd just declared war on the wrong person. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to yell or threaten. I was going to dismantle her entire empire, brick by brick, fine by fine, and badge by fake badge. And when I was done, Karen would wish she'd never walked up my driveway. By the time the sun came up the next morning, I wasn't just angry, I was focused. Karen Delaney hadn't just harassed the wrong homeowner. She had declared a power play against a federal marshal. And now, I was going to do what I do best, dig. I started where every good investigation begins, with the money. A few hours on county record systems and some deep diving through public civil filings told me exactly what I needed to know. Karen's HOA wasn't just flexing too hard. It was running what looked a whole lot like an extortion ring disguised as a neighborhood association. See, it started small, phony citations, made-up violations, nuisance fines. But then it escalated. People who didn't pay were met with HOA officers. Not city cops. Not county deputies. Just guys like the ones I'd met, dudes with plastic badges and matching polos, issuing threats and taping final warnings to front doors. If you still didn't comply, they filed liens. Fake ones. I found 6 homeowners, 6, who had their properties seized under unpaid HOA debt. The pattern was always the same. They'd moved into homes that were technically outside the HOA boundary. But Karen claimed those homes were within the extended community influence zone. Which isn't a thing, unless you live in her imagination. One of those homeowners was a retired widow named Elaine Whitmore, no relation. Just a cruel coincidence. She had lived in her house for 23 years. Her paperwork? Solid. Her lawyer? Not so much. Karen served her with over $8,000 in violations over a 6-month span, every one of them bogus. When she refused to pay, Karen's crew padlocked her fence, claimed default, and sold her home at auction to a developer she had once introduced at a neighborhood mixer. But here's the kicker. Those seizures? They weren't just HOA bullying. They had court stamps on them. So I started looking at court documents. One name kept showing up over and over again, Judge Malcolm Dorrance. I'd heard of Dorrance before. Small-time magistrate. The kind of guy who wore the robe because he liked hearing himself talk in a courtroom. He had signed off on every lien Karen submitted, without ever demanding the HOA produce real membership documents or legal proof of jurisdiction. It wasn't just lazy. It looked dirty. So I called in a favor. A buddy of mine works in federal oversight. Quiet job. Boring hours. But he had the right credentials to pull sealed communications and financial disclosures. Guess what we found? 2 years ago, Judge Dorrance had refinanced a cabin upstate, using collateral from a community trust partnership connected to, you guessed it, Oak Ridge HOA. It wasn't smoking gun corruption yet, but it was enough smoke to tell me there was a fire somewhere under all this HOA paperwork. And Karen was the arsonist. I went back through every mailing she'd sent. The fine print was always the same, in accordance with Oak Ridge Community Covenant guidelines. But no actual articles of incorporation existed for her extended influence zone. No county registration. No approval from the local zoning board. Nothing. In other words, Karen's authority existed on a fancy letterhead and a lot of hot air. She wasn't just enforcing fake rules. She was weaponizing them, for profit. I kept digging and found her HOA legal department was a shell account, just a PO box tied to a Gmail address. Her enforcement officers? Paid under the table. No W-2s. No insurance. No background checks. Most of them had criminal records or eviction notices of their own. Karen had built a criminal enterprise. And no one had stopped her because she looked official. She had the look, the clipboard, the blazer, The golden wristwatch she never stopped adjusting. But it was a costume for a con. And me, I was done playing defense. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, spread out every citation, every fake notice, every photocopy of a warrant. And then I pulled out my recorder and started building a timeline. Each victim, each phony violation, each dollar Karen had stolen. I wasn't going to the HOA. I was going to the district attorney. But not yet. See, if you want a sting to work, you have to let the spider keep spinning her web. So I baited her. I filled out a response to her latest notice, asked for a hearing, told her I wanted to avoid further escalation. I made it sound like I was finally cracking. Karen bought it. Hook, line, clipboard. And now, I just had to wait, because Karen was about to walk into her own trap. And this time, real law enforcement would be waiting on the other side. Friday afternoon. Clear skies. Room temperature war. I showed up early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to see it all play out, every twitch, every smirk, every flash of fake authority Karen still thought she had. The hearing was being held in a dusty community rec center, you know. The kind usually reserved for kids' karate classes and overcooked potlucks. Nothing about it looked official. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The fold-out chairs were mismatched, and a cheap plastic table had been draped with a tablecloth that still had last week's bingo stains on it. And yet there she was, Karen Delaney, sitting at the head of the table like a low-budget dictator, clipboard in hand, cheap wooden gavel resting beside a stack of printed case files. She saw me walk in and gave me a smile that dripped with smugness. "I'm glad you decided to come," she said. "It shows you're finally willing to be cooperative." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, calm and casual, like I wasn't carrying the weight of 2 federal investigations in my back pocket. Behind Karen sat 3 board members. I recognized them from past HOA notices: Tom, Lisa, and Greg. They all looked like they were trying to cosplay as legal counsel but forgot what real attorneys actually wore. Lisa even had a manila folder labeled evidence in Sharpie. On the opposite side of the table were 2 other homeowners, people I'd learned had also been targeted. They looked tense, confused, maybe a little scared. And then Karen banged her little gavel like she was opening court on Law and Order, Suburbia. "We are here to address serious breaches of Oak Ridge community policy," she announced, scanning the room like she was about to drop the hammer. "The respondent has failed to comply with multiple directives, and this arbitration will determine appropriate restitution or property reassignment under HOA Charter Clause." I raised a hand. "Karen." She stopped mid-sentence. "Yes?" she said, lips tight. "Just curious," I said, gesturing around. "Where's your legal counsel? Court stenographer? Maybe a neutral third-party arbitrator?" Karen's smile stiffened. "This is a community enforcement hearing. It doesn't require formalities." I nodded. Like that made sense. Right. Totally legitimate. She plowed ahead, reading off the list of fabricated violations, inflating fines into the thousands, referencing laws that didn't exist. Every word she spoke sounded like it had been plucked from a Wikipedia page and passed through a buzzword blender. Then, she said the line that sealed it. "If you do not agree to settle these fines today," she declared, "we will authorize further enforcement action, including property seizure and forced compliance." I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and asked one final question. "Karen, you expecting someone?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You keep checking the clock," I said, nodding toward the wall. "Is the HOA Enforcement Division on their way?" The silence was loud. Tom shifted in his seat. Lisa avoided eye contact. Greg coughed into his sleeve. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the doors burst open. Federal agents flooded the room. Not rent-a-cops, not mall security. Real uniforms, real badges, and right behind them the assistant U.S. attorney, a woman in a charcoal blazer with the expression of someone who was done with suburban nonsense and ready to burn a paper empire to the ground. "Karen Delaney," she announced, unfolding an arrest warrant as the room froze. "You are under arrest for fraud, wire fraud, impersonating law enforcement, and conspiracy to commit extortion." Karen went white. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then finally, she shrieked, "Wait, this is a mistake. I'm the president of the HOA. "No," I said, standing. "You were playing dress up with real lives. You forged documents. You threatened homeowners. You tried to arrest a U.S. Marshal." She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. You set me up. "I gave you every chance to stop," I said. "But you didn't want peace. You wanted control." The board members panicked. Tom stammered something about not being involved. Lisa dropped her folder. Greg straight up slid his chair away from the table and raised both hands like someone had pulled a gun. Karen was cuffed right there at her folding table. The gavel clattered to the floor. "You're making a mistake," she screamed as agents escorted her out. "I have authority. I am the law here." "No, Karen," the assistant U.S. attorney said coldly. "The law is here. And you're going with it." As the doors slammed shut behind her, the homeowners in the room sat stunned. Then someone clapped. Then another. And before long, that dingy old room filled with the sound of justice finally catching up to a tyrant in a salmon-colored blazer. Karen Delaney didn't just fall. She crashed. Spectacularly and publicly, dragged out of her own fake courtroom, screaming about bylaws and misunderstanding, while real federal officers slapped on the cuffs. And that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the end. By the following Monday, the story was already front-page news on every local outlet. Fake HOA president arrested in sting operation. Community leader charged with federal crimes. Homeowners celebrate fall of HOA queenpin. But the real celebration? That happened in driveways, at kitchen tables, and on porches across Oak Ridge. People who had been living in fear of Karen's clipboard mafia finally exhaled. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been collecting receipts. Within days, over a dozen homeowners came forward with their own horror stories. One woman had paid over $11,000 in fake landscaping fines, just to avoid foreclosure threats. A retired couple had their home nearly seized for noise violations during the pandemic, while they were out of town for a funeral. A young family had been tricked into signing a fake compliance agreement, binding them to HOA rules on a house that was never part of the HOA to begin with. Each case followed the same pattern: fabricated infractions, escalating threats, and phony enforcement visits. Karen had created her own kingdom of fear, and she'd ruled with a smug smile, a clipboard, and just enough legal-looking paperwork to fool the average homeowner. But now, the feds were unmasking every layer. Over 24 counts were filed against her, ranging from impersonation of law enforcement, mail fraud, and wire fraud to conspiracy and extortion. The judge didn't buy her community leadership defense, especially not after they saw video footage from the fake hearing, complete with her banging a dollar store gavel like she was Judge Judy's evil twin. The sentence: 8 years in federal prison. No probation. No slap on the wrist. No HOA left to hide behind. And as for the rest of the HOA board, well, they turned on each other faster than you could say unpaid special assessment. Some tried to claim they didn't know what Karen was doing. Others admitted they were just following instructions. But the emails didn't lie. The bank records didn't lie. The signatures on those fake lien filings didn't lie. Within a month, the HOA was legally dissolved. No more fake violations. No more staged enforcement visits. No more Karen. And something strange started happening around the neighborhood. People began talking to each other again. We rebuilt the community, not with threats and fines, but with block parties, potlucks, and actual neighborly cooperation. No rules about paint color. No surveillance drones hovering over lawns. Just people, finally free from a tyranny they never voted for. Every homeowner who had lost money got their refunds through a class action settlement. Several filed additional lawsuits against Karen directly, civil suits that would likely haunt her long after her prison sentence ends. Her house, it sat empty for months. No one wanted it. Eventually, it was listed as a bank foreclosure, the same fate she had threatened others with. Now turned on herself. And me? I still live on the same street. Same truck. Same yard. But now, my mornings start with quiet coffee, not forged warnings. Sometimes, I walk past Karen's old place, just to remind myself what unchecked power looks like, and how fast it crumbles when someone finally says no. Because at the end of the day, Karen didn't lose because she broke a law. She lost because she thought no one would ever challenge her. She thought her clipboard made her queen. But she forgot something important. The real law wears a badge, not a salmon blazer. And on that day in that fake hearing room, the law showed up. And Karen, she was finally out of order.